Hello, Professor. Here goes my final video, critical reflection video, and it's going to be number 5. And I have so much to say about this particular um, segment of readings. So, what are the text assumptions about the phenomena being discussed? I would say that the assumptions being made are the fact that people generally white Americans or anyone who is not Black American, and I say Black meaning African American or Caribbean American, basically the majority don't understand that racism still exists, and they don't understand how to be proactive about it, and they don't understand that statements like I don't see color are damaging to our society and to our progression as a society. This is kind of like an extreme comparison, but when I think about people making statements like I don't see color, it's almost like telling a rape victim that the horrible act didn't actually happen. And I think that is a huge problem. What are the implications of the assumptions and or the arguments? So these basically the invisibility of the Black Americans are are an issue because, as they put it in the book, the schools are pipelines to prisons. Um, some of these low budget schools, it's interesting. Like I thought about this even before I read this part of the story. How certain low budget schools already mirror prisons with the way that they look and the lack of resources they have and the dullness and the guards. It's like preparing them for prison. And I think that one of the major statements that I read regarding the school to prison pipeline is how wealth culpability shapes outcomes. I'm sorry, wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. It's nothing more than that. How many times have we seen guilty people buy their way out of situations? So this is a huge implication. It's a huge problem that we have. Who or what are the authors arguing for or against? Obviously, they're arguing for African minorities from any type of descent. Um, I think it was so interesting when reading about the different focus groups. They talked about how their main struggles and the emerging themes were isolation, struggles. Well, let me just break it down. So, isolation, how they find themselves obviously alone, struggles to name racism, how part of the um, racism is so subtle that it makes them doubt the reality of the racism that they're going through. It's hard to kind of name it or point it out because it's tethered so tightly within day-to-day life that it's hard to pick it apart. And then exhaustion from playing expected roles. When I was reading about the hostess, and I think about certain scenarios that I've been in, you know, I'm Hispanic, but I'm of mixed race. So there's things that I relate to, and there's some sort of light skin privilege that I'm also aware of. You know what I mean? If somebody's a lot darker than I am, I understand that there's differences. There's differences in the way that different people treat you, and even within like my own Hispanic community, I've I've experienced times where I'm not Colombian enough because I don't look Colombian, or I probably should be Dominican. Um, so I understand the role of a hostess, the role of trying to make other people comfortable with you by being a host. And it sounds so insane when you read it and when you attach that word hostess to it, but it's true, it's real. And then the last one is the schisms between Black cultures. And I think about, um, being raised in South Florida, we do see Caribbean Americans disassociating themselves from African Americans and therefore perpetuating that isolation. And Hispanics are guilty. So many, I mean, it's hard for me to speak this as a fact, but from my experience, Hispanics generally are taught that they need to improve the race, and they say mejorar la raza. They say that it's better to date someone that's lighter because, we want to keep that, I don't know, that whiteness alive, that it didn't even exist. Obviously, me being product of my dad being black and my mom being a more fair-skinned Hispanic, that didn't apply to us. But even when they were dating, I know that my dad faced some issues and some hesitance and some pushback from my mom's parents because he was black, and that's just enough of an issue even within our own Hispanic cultures. Um, I thought it was blowing my mind when I read that in 2013, still even in 2013, 76% of public school teachers are white females. So I think on one of the opening statements, the authors taught about how when they opened up giving presentations, they started it with fully admitting their privilege and fully admitting that they won't fully ever understand what it's like. Even it doesn't matter how much they study, how many focus groups they do, how many interviews they do, they won't fully understand what it is to be black in America because they haven't experienced that. So I think that's such a huge advantage that they're giving themselves when they speak to other people, to be heard and to be humble. I think that makes all the difference. And I think that is so important, considering that, I mean, I don't know what the statistics are now 6 years later, but that's the majority, and they probably are still the majority. Um, I think it's also important to not think of yourself as a white savior. Even in general, when we're going into a situation in a classroom or whatever, anything in our lives where we want to come and help people, if you're going to go feed the homeless, I think it's so important to have the understanding, the mentality that you're not the savior, but you're equal, and you're coming into a situation where yes, you're helping, but it doesn't mean that you are Jesus to anyone. You can be showing Jesus' love, but it doesn't mean that you are better than them because you're helping them. Um, Another point along that line is that it's not enough just being anti-racist, and we can't pretend um, to avoid the issues that they're dealing with. Um, I think another important point that was made was how white people can address, they have the option to address and to dig into and to try to understand racism, but black people don't. It's something that comes to them, and it's something that they can't just say, oh, I think I'll think about that later, or I think I'll address that later. I don't want to talk about that. That's a weird thing for me. Like, that's not an option. In regards to community is so key, and I know that everyone in early childhood education, from many different standpoints, such as early childhood um, literacy, understands the importance of community. And I just thought it was interesting to learn um, how parent teacher interactions can be useful once we not only decide to hear the parents out and try to understand what they want for their children's education, but also to create student-led programs and create processes and not events, right? Processes require time and require dedication. And when you have time and dedication, you have a connection. And so it makes these processes, or these not events, but these gatherings, so much more meaningful when students fully understand what they're doing, they're engaged in what they're doing, they take ownership, and then obviously they're gonna share that. It's gonna be infectious to the students around them and to their parents. Um, how do the texts fit in relation to your own thought and practice? So when I taught BPK, um, I actually only taught one African American student, but I didn't teach him for long because he was so smart. he was actually adopted, and he was doing so much home training that he was way past our level. Like he knew the curriculum better than I did. So when I think about how did this affect my practice, I didn't get to do enough of the practice, and I guess it wasn't a typical case because this student was actually more advanced than everyone in the class. How do authors construct and articulate their arguments? These stories are so hard hitting, and they also have a lot of great quotes. One of my favorites is about Bob Moses talking about the importance of math literacy in urban and rural communities, and how it's just important as a lack of registered voters 40 years ago. I think this is such a huge key that it seems like a no brainer, but I until reading this sentence I never thought of it. How the absence of math literacy in these communities affect the future participation in economy, in our country's economy. How can we expect them to be top leaders of the marketplace if they at the foundation never even got the opportunity to understand math? Like, whew, that one drives me crazy. And then also Ella Baker made a statement where she said, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest until the killing of black men, black mothers, and sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons." It's true, and it's very sad. I think I got most of my points down. Um, the last point I just wanted to talk about is music. How important it is in the African American culture, and how it could even be like a spiritual connection to their ancestors. When I used to teach VBK, I would play music for my students, and I think that it's genius to play certain music during certain lessons so that when later on when the students are taking those tests, they can connect, and they can activate that memory through that music. So that was a very helpful tip that I was blessed by. What questions do you find yourself after doing the reading? I'm just wondering like how long it's gonna take until this type of teaching, the recognition of white female teachers, um, and their privilege, and how they can be active in closing this achievement gap. How long is it going to take until that's a majority? Thank you.